Hey, we're going to do I know it's been a little while, but I've been kind of busy, but I wanted to continue in my Americanism series, and my next video I wanted to make was kind of like a little more on history of the United States that maybe you don't know about. And this one will be a video on the actual secession of the 13 colonies. And what I mean by that is you always hear about the 13 colonies uniting on July 4th, 1776, and going against the British to become one country. And there's a lot of different things that go along with that, how the states formed, and all these other stories that might go along with it, which we'll cover another later on. But on this video, I'm going to talk about real quickly why the colonies more or less broke away from Great Britain. And what you see here in front of you is the simple map of the the North American area. Basically, right before and after what we call the French and Indian War, or overseas in Europe was called the 7 Years' War, even though it lasted more than 7 years here in the United States, or where I'm at in New Hampshire. So, as you can see here, the before and after. In the after, there's a area. If you look at the area of the 13 colonies on both maps, they're roughly the same area before the French were removed and after. And what the British did in 1763 is they decided they made what they called the Proclamation Line of 1763. And what that was the area that the colonists in at the time, really 12 colonies, because Delaware was part of Pennsylvania, but whatever, the 13 colonies, that they're called, were not allowed to go past. So if you were a settler and wanted to start heading west to find better land and so forth, like the Ohio River Valley, which was rich soil and so forth, you couldn't go there. You were actually told you couldn't go there. And what ended up happening is, over time, the patience of the colonists, along with just I guess the best way you could say is just imagine somebody telling you can't do something, especially as a child. Remember when you were growing up and your parents would tell you can't do something, made you want to do it even more. So of course, what happened when the British said that you couldn't go past this line, people started going past that line, or got mad because they were told they couldn't go past that line. And then what happened over the next 5, 6, 7 years is basically we started thinking in North America, as British colonists, we were starting to think, hey, we don't have the same rights as other British citizens, and this is not right. And then they started looking at taxes and what they were really paying for things, even though if you look at the record, the American colonists had it pretty good. They were taken care of. They were, I guess, what I'm trying to say is, the whole taxation without representation, they were actually treated fairly well as far as what they had to pay for and what they were given and all this kind of, if you add everything together, it wasn't that bad. But the real linchpin of it was being no freedom. Not no freedom, but your freedom was being limited. They told you where you could and couldn't go. And, as Americans, if you're an American now even, that doesn't wash too well. So this is my feeling of how the Revolution really started. That was the Proclamation Line of 1763. So after the Proclamation Line of 1763, and then the other problems that came up, and then the Boston Massacre in 1770, everything just started going downhill. And eventually the colonists just got tired of being under British rule. Why have a tyrant running or controlling you? They say George III was a tyrant, saying, telling them what they could do, and he was thousands of miles away. So what ended up happening is some states before others in areas, they just started rebelling against the British. And what ended up happening is the states rebelled. Well, and if you didn't know this, each state in the Union actually pulled away from Great Britain, not just on July 4th, 1776. So let's take a look and find out in order which states succeeded, or which areas, they turned out to be states, seceded from the British Empire. So we're going to go away from this one, and let's go over the first state that seceded from the British Empire. And I bet you probably don't know who it is, or some of you might, especially if you're from this state. Here you go. The first state to secede was the state, or the colony, of Massachusetts Bay, which was a merger of Plymouth Colony and Massachusetts Bay Colony. So it ended up being called Massachusetts later. But Massachusetts was actually the first colony to secede from Great Britain. And it seceded in October of 1774. So that's pretty, it's a little bit ways before the Declaration of Independence. So they basically, what ended up happening in Massachusetts was it turned into a little civil war inside the state, the loyalists against the rebels, basically. And the rebels established their own government west of the city. And sorry, I don't remember exactly what town it's in. But they had a revolutionary government that lasted all the way until, into the Civil War, and then basically, that was the government that ran the state afterwards. So you could say that Massachusetts officially became a dissident state of the British Empire. So we could say that October 1774 we had the first colony secede from Great Britain, and that was the colony of Massachusetts. Let's look at the second one. What do you think the second one was? Well, the second state to secede was North Carolina. North Carolina seceded from the British Empire in August of 1775. So in August of 1775, there were now two colonies that were broken away from Great Britain and could be considered their own country, more or less. It's kind of vague because they were basically just rebelling from the British. So basically, about a year, almost a year after Massachusetts, North Carolina said, "Yeah, we're done with this," and they went ahead and had a vote, and basically a vote of secession, basically. So North Carolina was the second state to secede from the British Empire. Number three was the state, or the colony, of New Hampshire. This was a significant one because when New Hampshire seceded, they actually did it by making a new constitution. So they were the first sovereign state that had a constitution. They officially did it. Massachusetts was going through a Civil War period. North Carolina basically said, okay, we've broken away from England, but officially didn't adopt any paperwork, really. New Hampshire was the first one to actually pull itself away from Great Britain with an actual constitution. So they made a constitution that lasted all the way until, I believe, the 1780s, when they did another one. So New Hampshire was the third state to declare itself its own sovereign state and pull away from the British Empire. Number four, the colony of, I keep doing that, the colony of South Carolina. South Carolina seceded from the British Empire in March of 1776. So that was the fourth colony to pull away. The fifth colony to pull away was the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. Yes, that's the whole name of the colony. Rhode Island seceded from the British Empire in May of 1776. Actually on May 4th, and I use the specific dates because a lot of other ones came up in May as well, including our sixth candidate, or our sixth colony that seceded was Virginia. In this map, it's actually Virginia and West Virginia. Back then, Virginia and West Virginia were one state, so they seceded from the British Empire as well. In May 15th of 1776, they decided to separate from Great Britain. The seventh state is actually very significant as well because this is the first date where this colony, or part of a colony, Delaware, seceded on June 15th, 1776. So on June 15th, Delaware became its own sovereign state. So they were no longer associated with Pennsylvania or the British Empire. The eighth state to secede was Connecticut. Connecticut seceded the next day on June 16th, 1776. The ninth state, New Jersey. New Jersey seceded from the British Empire on July 2nd, 1776. So just in time for the Declaration of Independence to take effect, they officially withdrew from the British Empire on July 2nd. And basically the same day as the Declaration of Independence, basically the Declaration of Independence was the document that Pennsylvania uses for secession, pulled away from the British Empire on July 4th, 1776. As well as the 11th state, Maryland, declared itself also broken away from the British Empire via the Declaration of Independence on July 4th. The 12th state, if I can find it, yep, there it is, Georgia. Georgia was the 12th state, also on July 4th, as with the Declaration of Independence in 1776. Now, there's a couple other things I need to show you. One, Vermont. Now, Vermont was contested between New Hampshire and New York Won't get into that long story, but basically, once New Hampshire pulled away and the Declaration of Independence took effect, Vermont was now territory or something that did not belong to the British Empire. It just hadn't worked out who owned it yet. As well as Maine. Maine was part of Massachusetts, and I don't think it was really mentioned much as far as Massachusetts. Everything you hear about Massachusetts at that time was in the state, but Maine was part of Massachusetts back then, so Maine basically went until 1820 or 1821 when it became a state in the United States. Maine was part of Massachusetts, so they would be part of part of Massachusetts back in 1774. Now, one state I did not mention, the state of New York. The reason I did not mention the state of New York is because, at least I haven't mentioned it yet, was they were part of the 13 colonies that separated on July 4, 1776. But for whatever reason, their legislature didn't, I don't want to say approve is the right word. You can read up on it more. I don't have it in front of me. But for whatever reason, they used July 9th as basically officially becoming breaking away from the British Empire. So even though they were part of the group that actually wrote the Declaration of Independence, I guess officially it took another 5 days for New York to officially declare itself broken away from Great Britain, at least on its own terms or whatever. A point could be argued that they did it as part of the Declaration of Independence, but then why bother having that special legislative act that happened 4 days later or 5 days later? But needs to be said that they pulled out on July 9th, 1776. Basically, I think what ended up happening is they just ratified the Constitution. Ratified the Declaration of Independence. So I think either date probably works, but that's why I put them as number 13. So that's the new order of states. You can't say states of the United States yet. Well, you can't because they were all basically independent little countries until the formation of the United States of America on July 4th, 1776. So, hope you enjoyed the video. I know it's kind of, my monotonous tone might not be that exciting, but I figured it would be worth some information to put out, and I wanted to count this as part of my Americanism series. So, thanks for listening and watching, and the next one we're going to do is the actual, well, I'll make it a surprise, okay? It's going to be something similar to this, but the next video hopefully will come up in a few days instead of a month. So thanks for watching.